I can still taste that morning on the back of my tongue. Cold, lumpy oatmeal and watered-down powdered milk. The exact same breakfast I had choked down for 17 years at St. Catherine's Home for Children in Portland. The cheap metal spoons scraped against the scratched plastic bowls with a rhythm that never changed. Overhead, the fluorescent tubes sputtered and buzzed with the same flat, headache-inducing drone they had maintained since I was 4 years old. It was a Tuesday in March, indistinguishable from 1,000 others, until a death in the family changed the trajectory of our lives and handed us a secret we didn't know we were missing. I'm Lillian, though everyone settles on Lily. I was 23 that morning, but my soul felt decades older. Growing up as a ward of the state weathers you in ways a mirror can't catch. It settles deep in the marrow. I had been out of St. Catherine's for 5 years, juggling 2 dead-end jobs and a studio apartment the size of a closet, desperately trying to construct a life that felt real. My brother, Sawyer, sat across from me in the waiting area. He had turned 19 the previous week. We celebrated quietly, a stale cupcake from the corner store and a card I drew myself because Hallmark prices were out of reach. He had flashed a smile when he read it, but his eyes remained empty, carrying that hollow, haunted look I knew better than my own reflection. It was the look of a boy forever waiting for a rescue that wasn't coming. We survived this building together, even after they split us into different wings when we hit 12, boys on the east, girls on the west. We still found the cracks in the system, passing notes through sympathetic older kids, meeting in the library stacks, or sneaking glances during mealtimes when the staff looked away. Sawyer was my only tether to the earth, the only soul alive who had seen our mother's face, even if he was only 6 months old when we lost her. I was 4 back then, old enough to carry fragments of her. I held on to the memory of her humming in the kitchen, the scent of her damp hair, but her features were lost to me. That image eroded years ago, smoothed over like a stone in a riverbed. We knew no father, no grandparents, no blood kin but each other. The caseworkers told us we were alone in the universe. Eventually, we stopped hoping otherwise. Mrs. Patterson summoned us to her office at 9:15. She was the head administrator, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and glasses that magnified her eyes. She had been a fixture in my life, kind in a bureaucratic sense, detached but never cruel. Today, however, she wore an expression I couldn't place. She looked unsettled, like she was holding a grenade and didn't know where to throw it. Under the table, Sawyer's leg was bouncing like a piston, his tell for anxiety. I reached out, resting a calming hand on his knee, reading his mood. We had played this scene 1,000 times, a silent conversation between 2 survivors who only had each other to rely on. Mrs. Patterson cleared her throat, shuffled a stack of files, and looked at us with a mix of pity and bewilderment. "There's been a development regarding your family situation," she said. Family situation? The phrase felt like a bad joke. I felt Sawyer stiffen. "Your grandfather," she continued, "a Mr. Walter Brennan, passed away 6 months ago." The words hit me but didn't stick. They slid off my consciousness like rain on glass. Grandfather? We didn't have grandfathers. "I don't get it," I said, my voice sounding foreign and thin. "We don't have family." "That's what you told us. That's what the file says." Mrs. Patterson nodded slowly. "The records were lacking. It seems Mr. Brennan was your mother's father. He lived in Millbrook Creek, a small town about 3 hours south of Eugene. He owned a farm down there, 40 acres. Sawyer made a noise, a sharp intake of breath that was half laugh, half sob. A farm? In his will, he named you as sole beneficiaries, both of you. The house, the land, the assets, it's all yours." I sat frozen in that hard plastic chair, surrounded by the gray walls of my childhood prison, feeling the earth shift on its axis. A grandfather we never knew existed, a home we never saw, a legacy we never asked for. Mrs. Patterson kept talking. She mumbled something about probate court, explaining the 6-month delay in locating us. She spoke of deeds and taxes, legal hurdles that my brain refused to process. Then she slid a heavy manila envelope across the desk. Inside were documents filled with legalese and a set of keys that felt impossibly dense in my palm. There was a card with an address penned in shaky cursive. Millbrook Creek, Oregon. Population 852. Beside me, Sawyer was weeping. I hadn't seen him break down like that in years. Not since he was 12, and they told him he couldn't follow me to a foster home. Not since the night I found him curled up in the hallway, his birthday ignored by the world, save for his sister. Now, silent tears tracked through the grime on his cheeks as he stared at the brass keys in my hand. "Why didn't he come?" he choked out, his voice fracturing. "If he knew we were here, why did he never come for us?" Mrs. Patterson had no answer for that, neither did I. We packed up and left Portland 3 days later. Everything we owned fit easily into the back of my Honda Civic, a beater I'd bought for $800 from a mechanic who took pity on me. The odometer had clocked over 160,000 miles, and the steering groaned whenever I banked left, but the engine hummed. In our world, a running engine was a luxury. Beside me, Sawyer was glued to the file, resting on his knees. He hadn't stopped analyzing those papers since we walked out of Mrs. Patterson's building, hunting for a reason, any trace of logic as to why we spent our lives in solitude when a blood relative was alive the whole time. "Birth year is listed as 1942, Sawyer murmured, turning another sheet. "So he made it to 82. I kept my eyes on the road. "Anything personal in there?" "Barely. It's mostly deeds and land surveys. Says the land has been with the Brennan since 1967, purchased jointly with a Clara Brennan, assuming that was his spouse, our grandmother. Just one more phantom we missed out on meeting. Passed away in 1998, Sawyer read. That's 26 years gone. 26 years of silence on that homestead. The thought settled heavily in the car. A solitary man managing 40 acres for over 2 decades. How does a person survive that sort of quiet? That depth of isolation? Outside, the road curved deep into the timberland, thick with Douglas fir and cedar. Giant trunks rose up to blot out the sun, forming an endless emerald canopy over the asphalt. We drifted through hamlets that felt stuck in a different era. Their downtown strips were all faded brickwork and lettering done by hand. Modest chapels with white spires sat next to grain depots and diners buzzing with neon that likely hadn't been updated since the 1960s. Service dropped regarding the GPS roughly an hour past Eugene. We were forced to navigate using the fold-out chart Mrs. Patterson provided. It felt fitting, honestly. We weren't just covering miles, we were drifting backward into a world that predated our foster files, our trauma, and our very existence. Sawyer kept the glass cranked down, ignoring the March chill. The breeze tousled his hair, and for the first time in years, I saw the perpetual knot of anxiety in his posture start to unravel. It was a subtle shift, but I caught it. "What if this is a clerical error?" he blurted out. "Come again? I mean, what if another pair of siblings named Lillian and Sawyer Brennan exists? Maybe this inheritance was meant for them, and we just got the letter by fluke. Imagine driving hundreds of miles only to be turned away at the door. I knew that panic well. We were taught young that optimism was a trap. Inside the foster circuit, expecting good things only left you bleeding. Then we handle it and move on, I replied firmly. But those documents list us. They list Mom. It's legitimate, Sawyer. This is our reality now." He fell into a thoughtful silence. Suddenly, Millbrook Creek materialized from the woods. We went from deep timber to a welcome board reading Millbrook Creek, population 852, established 1887, in the blink of an eye. The place was picture perfect, like a snapshot from a bygone era. The central avenue was flanked by vintage structures, their exteriors wearing pastel coats that had likely been vibrant decades ago. A chapel boasted high spires and stained glass, sitting near a service station with a mere pair of fuel pumps. Further down, hand lettering identified Perkins General Store. I steered us into the gravel lot outside the mercantile. We were going to need guidance. Our chart ended at the municipal limits. The homestead's location remained a mystery. A brass bell announced our entry. Inside, the air carried a rich blend of aged timber, roasted beans, and a floral note, perhaps lavender. Floor-to-ceiling racks held an eclectic mix of soup cans, leather gloves, and spades. A tabby dozed peacefully on a seat by the front glass. Managing the register was a lady in her 70s. Her silver hair was gathered in a relaxed knot, and her wire-frame spectacles glinted with every turn of her head. Time had etched lines into her skin, yet her gaze remained bright and gentle. "Well, good afternoon," she greeted us. "You folks seem a bit turned around." "We're trying to locate the Brennan estate," I explained. "We have the coordinates, but our navigation died an hour back." The shopkeeper's demeanor shifted instantly. A shadow crossed her features. Was it shock? Recognition? The Brennan property? "You're talking about Walter's land?" "Yes. Were you acquainted?" She paused, scrutinizing us closely. Her gaze darted between me and my brother. "Lord have mercy," she breathed. "You two belong to Rosemary, don't you?" Hearing that name felt like a punch to the gut. Rosemary, a word that hadn't graced the air around me in nearly 20 years. "How could you possibly know?" Sawyer stammered. The older woman clutched a hand to her heart. "It's the eyes. You both have them. I'd know that look anywhere." She gave a slow shake of her head, as if waking from a dream. "Name's Loretta Perkins. This is my shop. Walter Brennan was a dear friend of mine. He stopped by weekly for a cup of joe and a chat." "Did he ever mention us?" I blurted the question out before my filter could catch it. It sounded raw, desperate, revealing a hunger I tried to hide. Loretta's expression melted. "Honey, he never stopped talking about you. He carried a snapshot of you kids in his billfold. Pulled it out the second he sat down. Anyone willing to look saw that photo." She gestured toward a battered seat at the far end of the bar. I could practically visualize him perched there, an elder with our mother's gaze, boasting about 2 grandkids he had never held. "He knew we existed," Sawyer murmured, his voice faint. "He was well aware of us. There was never a doubt about that. And he carried a fierce, burning love for you, despite never having the chance to take you in his arms, despite everything." Loretta's voice faded, her gaze drifting elsewhere. Despite what? She held her silence for a long stretch. "It isn't my place to unravel that thread. I will tell you this much, though. If you make the trip out to that homestead, the truth will be waiting for you. Some of the history might sting, but Walter intended for those secrets to be yours. That is the reason he bequeathed it all to you." She handed over the route. The property sat 5 miles past the town limits, tucked away down a crushed rock lane that split from the highway. She had scripted the instructions on a scrap of parchment, her penmanship disciplined and precise. Before we departed, she stretched across the laminate and clasped my hand. Her touch was gentle, radiating warmth. "Welcome to Millbrook Creek," she whispered. "Welcome home." The track leading to the estate was tight and choked with greenery. Thickets of blackberry bramble pressed in on both flanks, their jagged limbs grasping at the vehicle like desperate claws. Untamed stalks of wheat danced in the draft, their heavy tops capturing the golden glow of the waning sun. We navigated that path for what seemed like an eternity, though the odometer likely barely registered half a mile. The canopy densified, casting shifting silhouettes that played across the dashboard. Suddenly, the timberline broke, revealing the destination. The main house commanded the center of the lot, appearing like a spectral memory. It rose 2 stories high, the whitewash that once coated it now failing, peeling away from the timber in long, brittle ribbons. A veranda wrapped around the structure, sagging heavily at one edge, the planks twisted by seasons of exposure. Plywood sheets covered the eyes of the upper level, blocking out the world. The brick stack tilted westward, appearing exhausted from its vigil. Yet, beneath the decay, a certain dignity remained, a sense of permanence. It had occupied this soil for generations, surviving gales and winters and the silent heartbreaks that accumulate where families grow and eventually depart. Past the residence, the silhouette of a stable loomed. It still held the memory of red paint, but the years had oxidized it to the color of dried iron, blending into the sanguine dusk. The barn doors stood slightly agape, a mouth opening into absolute shadow. Further back, the pastures rolled toward the skyline, feral and overgrown, claimed by colonies of blossoms that thrived without a gardener's hand. Hues of violet, gold, and cream rippled in the breeze. I killed the engine. We remained motionless. "It actually exists," Sawyer murmured. "It is real." We sat suspended in the quiet, gazing at an inheritance that felt like a fiction. A legacy granted by a stranger. A patriarch who knew our names, held affection for us, yet kept his distance. Sawyer broke the trance first. He practically vaulted from the passenger seat, shedding his typical reserve. I exited with more hesitation, attempting to absorb the atmosphere. The atmosphere carried a distinct perfume here, clean, rooted in the soil, with notes of evergreen and a sweet, unidentifiable bloom. The silence was profound. It was the deep stillness found only in the hinterlands, broken only by the draft and the birds, or the soft scuttle of wildlife in the brush. I ascended the veranda stairs with caution. The timber complained beneath my boots but didn't give way. At the threshold, I retrieved the brass set Mrs. Patterson had entrusted to us. My grip was unsteady. The mechanism was seized, likely fused by years of moisture and neglect. I had to massage the tumbler, applying uncomfortable force, until the bolt finally surrendered and the barrier swept inward with a long, hollow cry. The aroma washed over us instantly. It wasn't foul, merely the heavy, stagnant scent of a space that has held its breath for too long, stale and suspended. The interior was gloomy. Particles of dust floated like microscopic stars in the rare beams of light piercing the grime. Every furnishing remained exactly in its designated station. A sofa upholstered in a botanical print that likely screamed high fashion in the 1970s. A timber coffee table scarred by wet glass rings. Shelving units groaned under the weight of sun-bleached paperbacks and hardbounds, their titles obscured by the gloom. We navigated the ground level like trespassers in a mausoleum. The culinary space boasted an antique range, a deep basin discolored by decades of scrubbing, and cupboards still stocked with china, as if the owner had merely stepped out for a stroll. The dining hall featured a banquet table built for 8, though only 2 seats survived. I found myself pondering where the missing chairs had vanished to, and what discussions had soaked into the walls over the years. A modest office contained a workstation cluttered with documents and a typewriter that belonged in a historical exhibit. I brushed the keys, the metal cool against my skin, and tried to conjure the narratives that had been hammered out on this ribbon. A gray film coated every surface. Spiders had draped their silk curtains in the angles of the ceiling. Yet, beneath the layer of abandonment, I sensed the pulse of a sanctuary. A true shelter where souls had bonded and weathered life together. Sawyer had located the staircase. "Watch your step," I warned him. "We can't trust the structural integrity." He was already ascending, the risers protesting ominously under his boots. They held firm, and I trailed him up to the 2nd level. There were 3 sleeping quarters, each spare and modest, featuring bed frames holding naked mattresses and bureaus with drawers that fought us every time we tried to pull them open. From the primary bedroom, a solitary window offered a vantage point over the stretching fields. Lingering by the sill, I pictured the mornings to come, opening my eyes to that expanse, watching the dawn break over soil that was finally truly ours. Down the hall, a smaller room wore a coat of fading floral paper, the little yellow blooms lifting at the seams yet holding on to a strange sort of dignity. It struck me as the perfect sanctuary for Sawyer, though I kept the thought to myself for the moment. Outside, the day was retreating. Sunbeams shifted from gold to burnt orange, finally settling into the bruised violet that heralds the coming night. Scavenging in the kitchen yielded a few half-spent tapers. We struck a match, casting soft, flickering islands of illumination against the gloom, then collapsed onto the grit-covered sofa, too drained for speech. The structure breathed around us, shifting its weight with the distinct creaks, groans, and drafty whispers that belong solely to old timber and stone. "It is a home," Sawyer managed, his voice heavy with feeling. "Lily, this is real. We are home." I wrapped him in an embrace, holding him steady as his frame shuddered with quiet weeping. "Yes," I murmured into his hair. "We finally made it." Sleep took us, but the silence broke for me some time past 2 in the morning. Brief confusion washed over me. The blackness was suffocating, a far cry from my Portland rental where the city glow always bled through the slats. Here, the night was solid and unyielding until memory flooded back. The farmhouse, the bequest, the miracle of a key in our hands. I remained motionless on the cushions, tuning into the rhythm of Sawyer's deep, steady slumber next to me. Beyond the walls, a solitary owl hooted, and the breeze swept through the timberline, mimicking the crash of surf against a coastline. Then, a discordance, a sound that had no place here, a human tone, hushed yet undeniable, drifting up from the floorboards. Adrenaline spiked in my chest. I eased myself upright, straining to keep the springs silent as the noise repeated. Not 1, but 2 voices, low, indistinct rumblings, proving we were not the only souls inside these walls. I shook Sawyer from his dreams, clamping a palm over his lips before a protest could escape. In the dying candlelight, his pupils blew wide, muscles locking up beneath my touch. "Someone is below us," I whispered, barely exhaling the words. "Just listen." He froze, and then the realization hit his eyes. He caught the sound, too. We had taken our solitude for granted, believing the property vacant since Walter passed 6 months prior. A dangerous oversight. I snatched up a candle, my grip so unsteady that the wick's shadow frantically danced against the plaster. Sawyer anchored himself to my arm, knuckles white, and together we inched toward the landing. With every step down, the murmurs clarified. The source was deep in the rear of the dwelling, a section I had not fully inspected. Navigating the kitchen, a detail emerged that had escaped me earlier. Tucked behind the pantry stood a second entryway, formidable oak secured by an antique iron latch. It hung open just a crack, bleeding a soft amber glow. likely the warmth of an oil lamp or wax flame. The conversation drifted up from a cellar, and my pulse hammered so violently it drowned out the ambient quiet. My gut screamed at me to flee, to sprint for the vehicle, tear out of the driveway and summon the authorities to handle whatever nightmare was unfolding. Yet I remained rooted, held by something deeper than simple wonder, a desperate need to comprehend. So I nudged the timber barrier, revealing a rough-hewn staircase plunging into the earth. Illumination flooded the gap, and the murmuring cut off instantly. Whoever waited below knew they were no longer secret. A heavy, pregnant stillness filled the air, the sort that raises the fine hairs on the back of your neck. Then came a query from the depths, aged, trembling, but lacking malice. "Who is there? Has help finally arrived?" It was a female tone, laced not with threat, but with a profound, exhausting release. No terror, no aggression, only relief. I glanced at Sawyer, seeing his complexion turn ashen in the gloom, teeth clenched in dread. "We own the place now," I projected downward, feigning a courage I did not possess. "We are Walter Brennan's beneficiaries, his grandchildren." A pause, followed by the scuff of slippers and the slow, rhythmic thud of an ascent. A silhouette emerged from the well, an elder stateswoman with her silver locks confined in a severe knot. She wore a knit sweater over a plain cotton frock, her feet clad in house shoes worn thin by years of pacing. Her gaze met ours, carrying a mixture of shock and a haunting familiarity. "Rosemary's little ones," she breathed. "You made it back after all these years." I must halt the narrative here, for this instant marks the severance between my past and my future, the point of no return. Put yourself in my shoes, peering down at a total stranger who holds the name of your mother on her tongue. What is your move? Do you bolt? Do you dial the police? Or do you descend those steps to confront the buried history waiting in the dark? I need your perspective. Drop a line below and tell me what you would have done. If you haven't hit that follow button yet, now is the time, because the discovery in that cellar was merely the opening chapter of this farm's buried history. Let's descend into the dark and see what was waiting for me. Her name was Edith. She was 78, her face a living map etched with deep lines of solar exposure, anxiety, and past joys. Her fingers shook ever so slightly as she beckoned us forward. I couldn't help but stare at the translucent, paper-thin skin spotted with age. Shadowing her, moving with even greater difficulty, was a man she called Hank, her husband. An 80-year-old silhouette of a man who was once formidable but was now bowed by gravity. He navigated the room with a limp, placing each foot with the caution of a man who had learned his own skeleton was a traitor. Yet their gaze was piercing, lucid and watchful, mirroring our own bewilderment right back at us. The basement defied every assumption I had. It wasn't some damp, concrete tomb for cobwebs and discarded junk. It was a sanctuary, fully furnished, radiating a cozy warmth despite being subterranean. Carpets softened the hard floor. A makeshift kitchenette sat in the nook, sporting a hot plate, a mini-fridge, and a stack of chipped crockery. Near a wood stove that nursed the last of its dying heat, a pair of battered armchairs and a love seat formed a small circle. Tucked away behind a fabric divider, I spotted a bed, layered thick with quilts and soft pillows. It felt inhabited. Oil lanterns threw flickering silhouettes against the masonry, keeping the dark at bay. The atmosphere was thick with the scent of burning oak and simmering broth, signs of long-term survival. "Please," Edith murmured, waving a hand toward the sofa, "rest your legs. You must be confused." We obliged. Silence hung heavy. Edith stood there wringing her hands, searching for the right thread to pull to unravel this story. Hank sank into his chair with a groan, the relaxation of his facial muscles betraying a chronic agony that only sitting could relieve. "Walter and us, we go back over 45 years, Edith started softly. "We were neighbors in town long before he retreated out here after losing Clara. That was his wife, your grandmother. We were strangers to her," I admitted. "Strangers to all of them." Edith nodded, her expression heavy. "We know. It ate at him, the estrangement, the quiet." She breathed in deeply, centering herself. 3 years back, Hank's heart gave out. The treatments, the pharmacy costs, it was relentless. The debt mounted faster than our income. We liquidated the house, the nest egg. Everything we spent a lifetime building just vanished. Hank stared at his lap. The slump of his posture screamed humiliation, though he was merely a victim of circumstance. "Healthcare costs," Edith sighed. "They dismantle families in this nation, one bill at a time. We had 0 options left. Shelters were at capacity. We were prepping to sleep in the sedan when Walter stepped in. He offered a lifeline. He offered up this cellar, said he'd retrofitted it ages ago for reasons he kept to himself. Stay as long as required, he told us, but there was a catch. Hank rasped, his voice sounding like stones grinding together. We had to remain below, no venturing upstairs unless he cleared it, and absolute secrecy from the town. Not a soul could know. Why? Sawyer pressed. The couple shared a knowing glance, heavy with history. Walter cherished his privacy, Edith explained. After Clara passed and the mess with Rosemary, he shut the door on the world. He needed his peace. We honored that. A small sacrifice for safety and warmth, 3 years. They had existed in this subterranean pocket for 3 years, emerging like ghosts at night while a solitary old man lived his life above. So, what changed? I asked. With Walter? Edith's facade crumbled, her eyes brimming as she stifled a sob with her palm. 6 months ago, she cracked. He didn't bring the morning tray. He was clockwork with breakfast, never missed a day. But that morning, silence. She paused to compose herself. I waited until midday, then I broke the rules. I was terrified. I went up, and there he was. Tears streamed down her cheeks freely now. Lying in bed, tranquil, like he just chose to drift away, his hand was clutching something. I assumed it was a book, but up close, she shifted her gaze to me, then Sawyer. It was a snapshot. 2 kids, a boy and a girl, you two. My chest tightened. There was one more thing, Edith whispered, barely audible. On the bedside table, a note. He must have been penning it that very night. The ink hadn't even fully dried in places. She hesitated. It began with your names, Lillian Sawyer, then just a fragment. I'm sorry I never had the courage to... That was it. Cut short. A vice gripped my heart. An apology begun but never finished. A final sentiment lost to the clock. What did you do with him? I asked gently. Nothing. I left him right where he fell. I was panic-stricken and didn't have a plan. I dialed 911, but I kept our names out of it. We were petrified they'd haul us in for breaking and entering, or something worse. I found a payphone in the village and pretended to be a worried neighbor who hadn't seen Walter around in a few days. And you didn't run? Sawyer asked. Run to where? She countered. We were broke, and nobody was lining up to take in 2 strays. Between food and the pharmacy, Hank's pills alone eat up more cash than rent does these days. Edith sounded completely drained. So, we retreated to the cellar and just... waited. Every single day, we listened for footsteps, expecting to be thrown out on the street. Nobody came until you showed up tonight. Her eyes were wide, pleading. That's when it clicked what she was really afraid of. She was bracing for eviction. She thought we'd reclaim the property and discard them, just like society always had. My mind flashed back to our time in the foster system. We were bounced from house to house, tolerated but never cherished, always waiting for the inevitable "you don't fit in here" speech. I glanced at Sawyer. I saw my own thoughts reflected in his expression. You're not going anywhere, I told her. Edith gasped, her hands flying to her face. But you're done with the basement, I added firmly. No more hiding like secrets. Pick a bedroom upstairs. You're going to live like human beings. Hank made a move to stand, maybe to shake my hand, but his legs gave out and he collapsed back into the armchair. Tears welled up in his eyes. You don't have to do this, Edith whispered, her voice trembling. I know we don't, I replied. But this place is huge. Maybe it's time we stopped surviving on our own and started looking out for each other. Sawyer reached out and gave my hand a solid squeeze. For the first time, we actually had a home. After a lifetime of wandering, we'd landed. But the house wasn't done telling its stories. Not by a long shot. Sleep was impossible that first night. I lay in the master suite, eyes fixed on the ceiling, listening to the old timbers groan and settle. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the panes and making the ancient trees dance and creak in the dark. I imagined Walter standing at this exact spot for 26 years, isolated with his regrets, harboring a love that had no destination. My thoughts drifted to Rosemary, the 17-year-old girl who fled this sanctuary and never looked back. What broke them? What catastrophe was so severe that she chose to raise 2 kids in poverty rather than accept a lifeline from her own father? I pictured the snapshot Walter clutched in his final moments. Grandchildren he never held, observed only from the shadows, loved with a broken heart. And that letter, the ink trailing off. I'm sorry I never had the courage to do what? To rescue us? To bridge the gap? To step up and be the grandfather we desperately needed? The end of that sentence was gone forever. buried with him, leaving behind a silence filled with unanswerable questions. "I'm here now," I whispered into the void. "I don't know if you're lingering, but I finally arrived. We're both here, and we're going to dig up the truth, every scrap of it." The wind responded with a soft, mournful sigh. In the shadows, I felt a presence listening. End of Part 1. The first week on the farm was a haze of dust motes and revelations. I was up before the sun each day, struggling to adjust to the heavy silence of the country. Portland was a symphony of chaos, sirens, traffic, the insomnia of a city that never stops. Here, the stillness was physical. It felt like a living thing, wrapping itself tight around the farmhouse. Edith claimed the kitchen like a general seizing territory. By Wednesday, the aroma of strong coffee wafted upstairs, brewed in an ancient percolator she'd unearthed from the back of a cupboard. She scrambled discount eggs and toasted stale bread, yet somehow transformed it into the best meal I'd had in a decade. Hank shuffled through the rooms, cataloging the decay and pointing out what needed immediate attention. A warped porch board here, a stuck sash in the upstairs bath, and a water stain on the kitchen ceiling mapped like a foreign country. Walter started slipping near the end, Hank explained, his tone a mix of grief and empathy. His body was quitting on him. His heart just couldn't take the strain. The maintenance became too much for one man. Sawyer shadowed Hank like a dedicated apprentice, absorbing everything. It was a side of my brother I didn't know existed. The system had always pegged him as troubled and unmotivated. Teachers washed their hands of him. Caseworkers stopped trying. Yet here, trailing an 80-year-old man through a crumbling homestead, he was thriving. I spent my time roaming the grounds. The land was vaster than I expected, 40 acres sprawling out like a frozen green ocean. I patrolled the boundary lines, cataloging the decay, fence posts rotting into the grass, sheds bowing under their own weight, and machinery oxidizing in the high weeds where it had been left to die. Yet, amidst the ruin, the land held a quiet grace. A stream cut through the eastern border, singing over stones with water so cold it numbed the skin, while an ancient orchard stood guard behind the barn, its trees twisted by time but stubborn enough to still offer up apples. Up on the rise, watching over the acreage, sat a tiny graveyard with 3 markers worn smooth by the endless Oregon drizzle. Clara Brennan, 1944 to 1998, carved deep as a beloved wife and mother, resting beside Robert Brennan, 1910 to 1975, and Mary Brennan, 1912 to 1982. Walter's people, parents and wife, all gathered here, silent sentinels over the soil they had tended. I lingered at Clara's plot, questions swirling in the silence. What was her spirit like? Would she have embraced us? Would she have battled the system harder than Walter did to keep our family whole? Walter, however, had no stone to mark his passing yet. I filed that away as a priority. He needed to be laid to rest right here, beside his kin where he had always belonged. A week in, I made a run for provisions. The general store was quiet, save for Loretta manning the register just as she had on my first visit. Recognition lit up her face, bringing out the gentle lines around her eyes. "How are you folks making out up there?" she asked softly. "We're managing," I admitted. "It's overwhelming." She watched me for a moment, her gaze deepening. "Did you locate the correspondence?" My pulse quickened. "Correspondence?" Loretta's face turned serious. "Walter wrote to you, every year, for years. He carbon copied every single one, showed me the stack once. He needed a witness, I suppose, proof that he hadn't just walked away from you. Where did he keep them? I can't say for sure, but that man really only lived in 2 spots. The main house and his wood shop. If that paper trail exists, it's in one of them." The shop. I'd glanced at the barn but hadn't breached the doors. The farmhouse had been enough of a mountain to climb without adding another. "I appreciate you telling me," I said. Loretta reached over the counter, covering my hand with hers in a brief, reassuring squeeze. "That old soul carried a lot of love for you. Whatever you dig up out there, don't you forget that." The drive home passed in a blur of adrenaline. What other fragments of his life had Walter tucked away for us to find? I didn't have to wait long. That very afternoon, Hank volunteered to guide us into the shop. "We practically lived out here," Hank murmured, back before my health turned. "It was a trade-off. He taught me the lathe, or maybe I taught him." The memories blurred together. We trekked across the yard, our little group matching Hank's fragile stride. The massive barn doors fought us, their iron hinges groaning in protest against the movement. It took Sawyer's weight to force them wide, and immediately we were hit with the scent of cedar dust, old resin, and stillness. Sunbeams sliced through cracks in the siding, illuminating motes of dust that drifted in the golden light like suspended memories. It was a cathedral of timber. Planks lined the walls, meticulously organized by species, stacks of oak, maple, cherry, and pine. Climbing toward the rafters. Some boards were raw and shaggy, others planed to a satin finish, while sawhorses occupied the floor, cradling works arrested in progress. A nearly complete rocking chair sat waiting, its runners carved into perfect fluid arcs. Nearby stood a bookcase lacking only a backboard, and a desk featuring joinery so complex it spoke of endless winter nights. The walls were a library of steel. Tools hung on pegboard, every hammer and wrench shadowed by a black marker outline to ensure its return. Rows of hand planes, chisels, and rasps gleamed dully, instruments of a craft I could barely comprehend. He was a master, Hank whispered. Truly. Boutiques in Eugene and Portland bought everything he made. Kept him fed these last few years. Sawyer drifted through the room, entranced, trailing his fingertips over the grain. He touched the cold steel and the warm wood, and I saw a shift in his expression. It looked like hope. Could I? He started, voice cracking. Is there anyone who could show me how to do this? Hank's face broke into a genuine grin, the first I'd witnessed. It would be my privilege, son. Consider it rent, Hank added softly. I stepped back, giving them space. As the old man began explaining the bite of a chisel and the flow of the grain, urging Sawyer to listen to the wood rather than fight it, I turned to my own search. Tucked away in a dim corner, obscured by a lumber pile, sat a workbench that looked different from the rest. Its top was a map of scars and gouges, dark with layers of oil and varnish that had seeped into the very fibers over decades. This was Walter's altar. The air here felt heavier, charged with the quiet intensity of the man who had stood here. 3 drawers with tarnished brass handles sat beneath the lip. The top 2 revealed the mundane. Grits of sandpaper, carpenter's pencils, calipers, and jars of fasteners. But the bottom drawer refused to yield. It took a firm grip and a bit of coaxing, rocking it side to side before the wood swelled with damp, finally let go. Nestled within lay a battered tin container, its metal dented and bearing a sun-bleached illustration of holiday biscuits, hinting at a sweeter past. I hoisted it with reverence, sensing a gravity beyond its physical mass. The latch was corroded by time, yet it yielded without a key. The hinges groaned in protest as they gave way, revealing a sight that shattered my composure. Envelopes, dozens of them, perhaps 50 or more, bound in stacks by rubber bands that had long since snapped and perished. A single, meticulous script adorned the face of every letter, addressed to Lillian and Sawyer Brennan, care of St. Catherine's Home for Children in Portland, Oregon. Each one bore the cruel red stamp. Return to sender, addressee unknown. My fingers trembled as I liberated the first missive. The parchment was brittle and yellowed with age. I smoothed the paper gently, terrified the fragile history would disintegrate into dust before I could bear witness to it. The header dated back 18 years. I would have been a mere child of 5. My dearest grandchildren, the ink read, I am unsure if these words will ever find you. I have no proof that my messages arrive, yet I continue to pen them because you must understand a fundamental truth. You are cherished. Know that somewhere on this earth a soul holds you in their thoughts at every sunrise. Your mother was my radiant sun. When she departed, she took the daylight with her. I believed the ensuing darkness would consume me entirely. Then, the news of your existence reached me. 2 lives, born of her spirit, my own blood. I yearned to rescue you. I have longed to fetch you every single day since I learned you were real. Yet, fear held me back. My pride and stubbornness drove a wedge between your mother and me. I pushed her away, and she died without granting me peace. I fear you might deny me the same. Thus, I commit my heart to paper instead. I cast these letters into the unknown, praying the universe guides them to your hands. I hold you dear, I always have. Please accept this truth, even if our paths never cross. Your grandfather, Walter. Tears blurred my vision before I completed the opening lines. By the final sentence, I was weeping too hard to focus on the ink. The tally came to 47 letters. I counted them later, collapsed on the workshop floorboards with the stationery strewn about like autumn foliage. 47 missives covering 18 years. Some were voluminous, filled with dense paragraphs of nostalgia, hope, and remorse. Others were brief, mere scraps scrawled on days when the heartache was too heavy for language. Every single one had bounced back. Not one had breached the walls of our isolation. Digging deeper into the tin, I uncovered another treasure. A snapshot. A girl, perhaps 17, posing before this very homestead, heavily expecting a child. She looked back at the lens, captured in a fleeting second of pure radiance. She possessed my gaze, Sawyer's stare, our mother, Rosemary. It was the first time I had ever beheld her image. The state files held no portraits, no history of the human she was before she became a statistic, a case file number, a tragedy. Yet here she stood, vibrant and breathing, nurturing one of us within her, grounded on soil that was our birthright. I flipped the print. On the reverse, in that same familiar scrawl, were 3 simple words: "My beautiful girl." There was more, a pocket-sized leather diary, dense with Walter's tight penmanship. I chose a page blindly. March 15th, 2019. Attempted to locate them again. The private investigator confirms they remain in Portland, wards of the state. Lily has turned 20. She is legally an adult. She is free to go, yet she has no destination. She is penniless, without kin, unwanted by the world. I want her. I want to bring them both home, but the words stick in my throat. I skimmed through the years, absorbing snippets of a grandfather's silent vigil. September 3rd, 2021. Sawyer reaches majority next year. They will be released. But to what end? Where will they drift? I could offer them sanctuary here, deed them the land. It is humble, but it is real. Would they accept it? Why would they take charity from a ghost who shares their genetics but none of their pain? December 25th, 2022. Solitude again. I roasted a ham, knowing it is too much for one man. I laid 2 extra plates at the table. One for Lily, one for Sawyer, a yearly ritual. Edith calls it masochism. She is likely correct, but I cannot refrain. They belong at this table. They always have. My clock is winding down. I feel the end approaching in my weary joints, in a heart that stutters. I must act. I must fix this. But what words cover a lifetime of silence? How does an old man explain his cowardice to youth who know only rejection? I shut the book. The emotional toll was too great to continue in that moment. Sawyer discovered me an hour later, grounded among the debris of a love that missed its mark. He offered no words. He simply joined me on the floorboards and began to read. We remained there until the light faded. I must pause here, for I sense many of you understand the gravity of this discovery. The sorrow, the rage, the crushing burden of lost years. But I have a question for you. Have you ever unearthed a family secret that completely rewrote your history? Ever discover that love was quietly waiting for you, right when you were convinced you were walking this path alone? I'd be honored to hear your experiences below. Please don't keep it inside. I've come to realize that the deepest wounds only start to mend when we finally give them a voice. You never know who might be listening, desperate for a reminder that their suffering isn't solitary. If you're new here, consider joining us, because the road ahead reveals just how messy bloodlines and affection really are. The fragile tranquility we'd cultivated at the homestead held together for precisely 9 days. By day 10, Vernon Brennan made his entrance. I was standing at the counter with Edith, trying to master the art of her mother's biscuits, when the sound of tires on gravel broke the spell. Glancing out the pane, I spotted a beat-up Ford hauling itself to a stop right alongside my compact car. The driver stepped out, a towering figure with steel-colored hair and features that appeared chiseled from old, rough-hewn timber. He lingered there on the grass, staring up at the structure with the hesitation of someone who had misplaced a memory and wasn't certain he had the strength to reclaim it. Sawyer emerged from the shed, with Hank trailing him at a cautious pace. We huddled together by the glass, observing the motionless figure by the pickup. "Recognize him?" I whispered to Edith, noticing the color draining from her cheeks. "It's Vernon Brennan," she breathed. "Walter's brother." A heavy stone settled in my gut. Walter wasn't an only child. We had a great-uncle, yet another relative who knew of our breath and blood but chose distance. At last, Vernon broke his stance and started toward the porch. He moved with a rigid gait, shoulders braced as if anticipating a blow. I opened the front door before his fist could even rap against the wood. He paused on the stairs, locking eyes with me. There it was. The same shade I saw in the mirror. The same hue in Sawyer, the very color Loretta had once pinned on Rosemary. "I take it you're Lillian," he stated. His tone was level, disciplined, devoid of emotion. "I am. And I assume you're Vernon Brennan, Walter's brother." "Correct." We remained motionless, sizing one another up. The kinship was undeniable now, the cut of his jawline, the specific posture he adopted. Traits inherited across the decades, etched into sinew and skeletal structure, defining the very cast of our expressions. "Can I help you with something?" I inquired. Vernon's lips curled, neither a grin of welcome nor a grimace of hate, but a strange ambiguity residing in the middle. "I'm here for what belongs to me," he declared. "My parents owned this land. My brother had absolutely no authority to hand it over to outsiders." "We aren't outsiders," I countered gently. "We're his grandchildren." "Grandchildren he never once laid eyes on," he shot back. "Kin who never showed up, never picked up the phone, never even bothered to mail a holiday greeting." His volume climbed with every accusation. "I am his own flesh and blood. I toiled on this soil alongside him for 20 years before he kicked me out. And now he wills the lot of it to you." From the hallway behind me a soft, pained noise escaped Edith. "The testament is binding," I replied, forcing my tone to remain unshaken. Everything was authenticated by the attorney. "Documents can be challenged." Vernon's gaze tightened. My brother had lost his grip on reality in these final years. Isolated out here, with no company except those two moochers downstairs. It was obvious his faculties were slipping. "I've already consulted counsel in Eugene," Vernon pressed on. "A competent litigator, not that amateur Walter employed locally. He assures me there are grounds. Coercion. Diminished capacity. We can keep this tangled in the legal system for years if need be." Tremors ran through my fingers, but I willed my speech to remain steady. "What is the purpose of this? If making peace with Walter mattered, you had decades of opportunity. He has been gone for 6 months. Why appear at this moment?" A shadow passed over Vernon's features for a split second, a nuance that closely resembled sorrow. Then it vanished, overtaken once more by that impenetrable, stony facade. "I owe you no justifications. I am simply informing you of the reality. We can either come to an arrangement where you liquidate the property and divide the earnings, or we stand before a magistrate and let the law dictate the outcome." He pivoted and marched back to his vehicle, expecting no reply. The motor thundered awake and stones scattered as he accelerated aggressively out of the drive. I remained on the veranda, eyes following his departure, sensing the delicate sanctuary we had constructed beginning to fracture. As dusk settled, I took the car into the village to visit Loretta. The mercantile was silent, resting in that twilight pause when folks retreat to their kin. I found Loretta arranging tins in the rear aisle, moving with a deliberate slowness that spoke of weary bones after hours of standing. "Vernon Brennan showed up today," I murmured. She paused mid-motion, placed the tin on the shelf, and turned to me with a look I struggled to decipher. "What was he after?" "The land. He intends to challenge the inheritance." Loretta moved her head side to side, emitting a noise that mimicked a chuckle but carried no joy. "That soul has been anticipating Walter's passing for 25 years. Likely had his legal counsel on speed dial before the funeral service even began. What actually transpired between them? Why did Walter exile him?" Loretta held her silence, balancing the weight of history against what I needed to know. "Vernon was chaos personified," she eventually confessed. "From his youth, he chased shortcuts and fast cash. He fell into the wager trap almost as soon as he left school. Started with cards, then graduated to the gambling halls when they arrived." She drifted toward the register and eased herself onto the very seat Walter had once occupied. For years, he and Walter shared the burden of the land. Although the deed listed them as partners, Walter carried the yoke. Vernon was usually absent, chasing easy money and gambling schemes until the red ink began to drown them. Vernon became desperate for cash. Significant amounts. A heavy knot tightened in my gut. I could see the betrayal coming before she even said it. How low did he sink? He robbed his own flesh and blood, siphoned $15,000 straight from the operating fund. Naturally, Walter discovered the theft. Nothing ever slipped past him. It ended in a shouting match. Cruel things were spoken, the kind that leave permanent scars. Loretta let out a long, weary breath. That single sound carried the weight of 30 years of witnessing a family self-destruct. Walter had every right to involve the sheriff. He could have pressed charges, yet he chose mercy. He simply banished him from the property, and as Vernon walked away, he vowed to make Walter pay for the humiliation. "It's pure spite then," I said. "He doesn't care about the dirt. He's just trying to settle a score with a ghost." "That plays a role, but it isn't the whole story." Loretta held my gaze steady. "Vernon has dug himself another hole. Rumor has it he's indebted to some very unforgiving characters. The land isn't a gold mine, but selling it would generate enough cash to save his skin. I steered the truck toward home, her revelation looping in my mind. This wasn't a case of a mourner looking for his birthright. We were dealing with a cornered animal facing ruin, and unfortunately, we were the only thing standing between him and his survival. The following 3 weeks felt like a siege. Vernon never set foot on the driveway, yet his shadow loomed over everything we did. The assault came through the mailbox. Heavy envelopes arrived, stuffed with intimidating terminology about probate, contestations, and court dates. I lost track of the hours spent on the line with Denise Caldwell, the attorney managing Walter's affairs. She remained calm and detailed, walking me through every page and potential scenario. "The document is ironclad," she promised. "Walter left no room for ambiguity. We even have clinical assessments verifying his state of mind at the time. He kept perfect records." "Then why are we going through this?" I asked. "Because the law allows anyone to file a complaint. Proving it is a different beast. He's banking on fear. He hopes you'll panic and cut a check just to end the nightmare." My mind drifted to our finances. That modest cushion I had built up over years of working double shifts was dwindling. Most of it had already vanished into groceries, hardware, and the essentials needed to bring the old homestead back to life. "What's the price tag on a defense?" Denise paused before answering. "If we go to court, tens of thousands of dollars." It was a sum we couldn't dream of paying. We had no means to raise that capital, yet we soon discovered we weren't facing this battle in isolation. The story rippled through Millbrook Creek the way it always does in tight-knit places, through hushed conversations and knowing looks carried by neighbors who protect their own. Loretta arranged a gathering at the local Baptist chapel for a Wednesday night. I was in the dark until the pastor rang me up, inviting Sawyer and me to attend. When we walked in, the sanctuary was at capacity. At least 50 souls were squeezed into those old oak pews, the wood groaning whenever someone moved. They were the everyday faces of our village. Folks from the supply depot, the lunch counter, and the service station. Men with calloused palms and women with gentle, resolute expressions. The pastor took the pulpit, his voice projecting clearly without a mic. Walter Brennan walked among us for more than 40 years. 12 years back, he wrote the check that restored this very roof. He swore me to secrecy. That was the measure of the man. Silent charity, a decent soul? Then the neighbors began to rise, one after another. A weathered grower named Curtis recounted the time Walter spent all night fixing a combine during the harvest rush, back when losing an hour meant losing the crop. Then Doris stood up, explaining through tears how Walter covered her mother's oncology bills when the insurance company denied the claim. "His mind was quicker than ours, right up to his last breath," Curtis declared, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Anyone claiming otherwise is a liar." They were volunteering to take the stand. They wanted to look a judge in the eye and swear that Walter Brennan was fully lucid when he drafted his final requests, that his decision to leave the land to us was calculated, intentional, and made with a clear heart. Tears streamed down my face that evening, not out of grief, but from an emotion I had never actually experienced. It was the sensation of having a shield, of being accepted into a tribe greater than myself. As the crowd dispersed, Hank pulled me aside. We made our way to the tool shed, setting a slow pace as he leaned on my forearm to steady himself. He eased his weight onto a workbench stool and sat in silence for a spell. "I've got something to share with you," he eventually murmured. "It's about his brother, and the night Walter passed." My pulse quickened. "What are you talking about?" "I kept it to myself initially," he admitted. "I didn't want to stir up more dust than necessary. But if he intends to make this a legal battle, you need the full picture." He inhaled deeply and exhaled a long sigh. 25 years back, when Walter caught him with his hand in the till, I was standing right there. I witnessed every second of it, heard every word exchanged. To avoid jail time, Walter forced him to sign a confession, a detailed admission of guilt. And that piece of paper is sitting in Denise Caldwell's archives right now. This evidence confirms Vernon got kicked off the land for stealing. It completely torpedoes any shot he had at the estate. I gaped at him. "You sat on this info? Why?" Hank lowered his gaze to his rough, calloused palms. "There's a bigger piece to the puzzle. Kept it to myself. Edith doesn't even know." A heavy stillness fell over the woodshop. It felt like the world outside paused to listen. "The night Walter passed," Hank measured his words carefully. "I was up. Bad hip pain kept me tossing and turning. Around 2 in the morning, the sound of an engine rolling up the drive hit me. I froze. I peeked through the basement blinds, keeping low. Sure enough, Vernon's pickup was idling right out front. Vernon was on the property the night it happened? Hank gave a grim nod. Saw him step out and head for the front door. He lingered on the stoop for a good while, 20 minutes or so, then he just hopped back in and took off. Did he actually enter the house? No. Can't say if he knocked or if they exchanged words. I just know he showed up. 2 days later, Walter was gone. You didn't go to the cops? I was terrified. You know we're living here off the books. Speaking up meant exposing our situation. We'd have been on the street. His voice cracked under the weight of it. 6 months that guilt has been eating at me. Asking myself if speaking up might have changed the outcome. I squeezed his shoulder, feeling the shivers running through him. You're sharing it now, I reassured him. That counts for something. Even as I comforted him, my stomach dropped. What business did Vernon have here in the middle of the night? Was it a peace offering, a threat, or something darker? I didn't have the answers yet, but I wasn't going to stop until I did. In the meantime, life moved forward. Sawyer attacked the carpentry work with a focus that was totally new for him. A few weeks in, his craftsmanship was turning even Hank's head. You've got the touch, son, Hank murmured one night, choking up a bit. Just like Walter, the talent jumped a generation and landed right in your lap. I watched a shift happen in my brother right then. He stood a little taller, and a spark ignited in his eyes that I'd never seen before. It was the first time anyone had ever told him he excelled at something, that he had value, that he wasn't invisible. We wrapped up the rocker first. The project Walter left undone. Sawyer handled the heavy lifting, sanding and varnishing until the wood practically glowed. A boutique over in Eugene snapped it up for $370. The cash wasn't a lifeline, but it was validation. It proved we could create value here, that we weren't just surviving. 3 months into our stay, the 90-day probation ended. That's when Denise Caldwell showed up with one last surprise from Walter. End of Part 2. Denise rolled in on a Tuesday. It was day 92 of our residency when I spotted her navigating the gravel drive from my spot on the deck. She drove a tidy silver sedan. Sensible, understated, exactly what you'd expect from a rural attorney. She emerged with a leather satchel in hand, the spring sun highlighting the silver in her hair. Lily, she greeted me, ascending the stairs. I've got a delivery. Specific orders from Walter. We gathered in the front room, Sawyer and I on the sofa, Hank and Edith in the recliners they'd basically adopted over the last quarter. The place felt changed, scrubbed down, sun-drenched, finally feeling like a living space rather than a shrine to the past. Denise unlatched her bag and produced a hefty, yellowed packet. The scotch tape sealing it turned brown and crusty with age. Walter was incredibly precise about how this was to be handled. She went on, My orders were to hand this over only after you survived 90 days here. If you'd bailed or sold the place before then, I was to shred it unread. She extended the package toward me. Walter's distinct script spelled out my name on the face, with Sawyer's listed right underneath. He needed proof of your dedication, Denise explained, that you recognized the value of this land and weren't just transients. I accepted the parcel. It had more heft than it looked. What's inside? No idea. Walter closed it up personally, swore me to secrecy and made me promise never to peek. He claimed it would all make sense once you read it, that it holds all the answers. My fingers shook as I peeled back the tape. It contained a letter, pages covered in Walter's tight, meticulous scrawl. Tucked behind the note was a vintage bank ledger, a relic you rarely see these days. I shot a glance at Sawyer. He gave a small nod, so I started reading to the room. To my beloved grandkids, if you're holding this, you stuck it out. You found something in this dirt worth fighting for. That makes you braver than I ever managed to be. I've struggled with how to pen this. I've drafted this opening 100 times, and scrapped it just as often. But my clock is ticking, and the truth needs to come out, messy or not. I've tracked you two since your very first breath. I know Lily landed on a freezing December morning, weighing in at 6 pounds, 4 ounces. You screamed so loud, the nurses teased that you were already filing a grievance with the management. I learned of Sawyer's arrival 4 years down the road on a sweltering afternoon in August. He was silent and observant from the moment he drew breath. I knew because I had a shadow on your mother. Even after the blowout fight and her departure, I couldn't just cut the cord completely. I hired a private eye to track her, to ensure she was safe, and to alert me if she ever hit rock bottom. The call came in when you were born, Lily. The phone rang again for you, Sawyer. The reports weren't easy to read. Rosemary was scraping by, juggling 2 jobs and shivering in a cramped apartment during the freeze, but she was holding on. She was making it work. I tried to step in. I mailed checks, but she returned them. I wrote letters, and they came back with the seals unbroken. I actually made the trip to Portland once, stood on the sidewalk for 3 hours, staring at her building, trying to muster the guts to ring the bell. My hand never touched the door. I rationalized it, told myself I was honoring her boundaries, that she had picked her path and I had to let her walk it. That was a lie. I was a coward. I was terrified of what I'd find in her gaze, the letdown, the fury, the hurt I had planted there. Then came the end. My investigator made the call, a wreck on the highway. She didn't even make it to the hospital. Lily, you were barely 4. Sawyer, a 6-month-old baby. That was the moment I should have stepped up. I should have been on the road instantly to bring you home. You were my kin, my bloodline, my duty. But I stayed put. I convinced myself you would be better off without me. I had failed Rosemary after all. I figured I would only fail you too. Surely the state could place you in a warm home, better than anything I could offer. I was dead wrong. I have carried that mistake for 19 years. I paused, my throat closing up. Sawyer reached out, gripping my fingers. Nearby, Edith wept softly while Hank held her close, his own eyes glassy. I found my breath and went on. The state failed you. They bounced you around, split you up, and let you slip through the cracks while I stood by, frozen by my own shame. Eventually, I tracked you down. I poured my heart into dozens of letters over the years. I mailed them to every location I could find. Every single one returned, address unknown, stamped on the front. Maybe someone hid them from you on purpose, or maybe it was just bureaucratic incompetence. It doesn't change a thing. The silence remained. Since I couldn't talk to you, I tried a different route. Every birthday, I sent a donation to St. Catherine's. Sent anonymously, but always earmarked specifically for Lillian and Sawyer Brennan. My instructions were clear. Use it for school, hobbies, anything to add a little light to your days. I have no idea if you ever saw a dime of it, or if they even told you it was there. But I had to try. It was my desperate way of keeping a tether to you, despite the chasm I bad built. And I saved up, too. Inside this envelope is a passbook for an account opened the same year we lost your mom. I have been feeding it ever since. Started small, but as the woodshop took off, the deposits grew. It belongs to you. It is for both of you, no strings attached. As of the last trip to the bank, it sits at $43,000. I lowered the paper and met Sawyer's gaze. He was streaming tears. $43,000. That covered the lawyers. It gave us a fighting chance against Vernon. It meant keeping the land. More importantly, it meant he had been thinking of us the whole time. I went back to the letter. One final request. I know I have forfeited the right to ask favors, but I am doing it anyway. Edith and Hank are salt of the earth. For the last 3 years, when I was completely alone, they became my family. They nursed me through illness and sat with me when the silence of this house got too loud. Life has not been kind to them, and do they deserve a break? If you can manage a little mercy, let them stay on. Treat them with the kindness I tried to show them. I would be in your debt. We do not share DNA, but that doesn't make them less family. Sometimes the people we pick mean more than the ones we are stuck with. Lastly, Vernon. My brother isn't evil. Not deep down, he is just damaged. He has chased ghosts his entire life, looking for the easy way out and only finding brick walls. I tried to fix him, over and over, and never could. 25 years back, he robbed me. Took $15,000 intended for property taxes to save the farm. I called him out. We screamed things at each other. Words that act like scars. I kicked him out. Told him he wasn't welcome on this land anymore. Exiled him from the family. I have carried the weight of that eviction every single day. Not because my anger wasn't justified. I had cause to be furious. But I slammed a door I should have left ajar. I gave up on him just like I gave up on Rosemary, and just like I gave up on you. Vernon is in pain. That is his baseline state. If he shows up looking for a piece of this place, understand what he is really after. It is not land. He wants a home. He wants absolution. Deeply, he longs to feel significant to someone. I lacked the capacity to provide that reassurance. My own scars, arrogance, and terror stood in the way. Perhaps you possess the strength I lacked. I am not suggesting you follow him without caution, nor that you offer respect he hasn't worked for. All I ask is that you truly observe him. Recognize the suffering masking itself as rage, the panic driving his entitlements. He is your kin. Apart from one another, he is the last link to your lineage. Surely that carries some weight. Never forget that I love you. You have always been in my heart. Please accept my deepest apologies for every failure, every mistake. My prayer is that one day you find it in yourself to absolve me. That letter was signed by your grandfather, Walter. I have to pause because those words completely dismantled my understanding of my own history. Through every year spent as a ward of the state, lying awake questioning if my existence mattered to a single soul, I carried the heavy burden of being discarded and unseen, never knowing he was actually keeping watch, loving us from a gap he couldn't bring himself to bridge. Has it ever happened to you? Realizing you were cherished the entire time you felt most isolated? Did you ever learn that the lack of contact stemmed from terror rather than desertion? Drop a note below. I believe many of us walk around with scars from feeling invisible, so let's hear your experiences. Perhaps witnessing our collective truth can aid recovery. Don't go anywhere, because the following events taught me that mercy isn't solely a gift for the offender. Often, it is an act of kindness toward our own souls. 2 days post-letter, Vernon arrived at our doorstep. I stood on the veranda watching his pickup materialize where the gravel drive meets the main road. Every fiber of my being wanted to retreat, bolt the latch, and shield our sanctuary from the person intent on dismantling it. Yet, an unseen force grounded me. Vernon cut the engine but remained inside, gripping the wheel with his head hung low for quite some time. He eventually emerged, dragging himself forward as if crushed under an unbearable invisible load. Halting at the stairs, he met my gaze. The rage was gone, replaced entirely by profound fatigue and suffering. "I didn't come for a battle," he rasped, his tone scarcely audible. "I came to make amends." Sawyer emerged from the house, his body rigid with protective instinct. I touched his forearm gently, a silent plea for him to hold back. Vernon dug into his coat and withdrew a small object. With a quivering hand, he offered it to me. An antique timepiece, the gold finish muted by years of touch. "Our dad owned this," Vernon explained. "It passed to Walter, who handed it down to me on my 18th birthday. For 47 years it has been with me. I liquidated every other possession to cover what I owed, but I couldn't part with this." He forced it into my hand. "Take it as proof of your Brennan blood. You need to know you are part of us despite my best efforts to ruin that connection." The metal still held the warmth of his grip as I clicked the lid open. Etched on the interior, smoothed by the years, was a simple phrase: "Home is where they love you." "Vernon," I asked, "what is the real reason you're here?" Silence hung heavy before his voice cracked. "Because I drove to Walter's place the very night he passed." At 2 a.m., I sat idling in his drive for 20 minutes, desperately trying to find the nerve to knock and apologize. I failed. I drove away in silence. Tears tracked through the lines of his face. He died 2 days later, and I lost the chance to say I loved him or beg for his pardon. His gaze swept over to the farmhouse and the sprawling acres his ancestors had tilled for ages. Rage has consumed me for years, furious at Walter for excommunicating me and furious at myself because I knew I earned it. I convinced myself that seizing this property and cashing out would silence the fury, that maybe being debt-free would make me feel valuable. He shook his head slowly. "That isn't what I need. I crave what I discarded 25 years back. Kinship, a home, a brother who offered love despite my flaws." Quiet filled the space between us. Sawyer stepped up next to me, a grounding force. "Walter mentioned you," I eventually spoke, "in the note he left us. He wrote about his remorse over shutting you out. He knew you were in pain and wished he had offered aid rather than distance." Vernon's expression collapsed. "He asked us to look deeper," I continued, "to recognize the hurt fueling your rage. He reminded us that you are our only surviving kin. He believed that connection mattered." I observed the shattered soul on my doorstep. My uncle, a relative, yet a stranger bound by genetics and a legacy of sorrow. "Supper is almost ready," I offered. "We have an extra seat, should you wish to join us." He stared at me as if I were salvation itself. "Why?" he breathed. "After all the damage I caused?" "For Walter, because we share blood, and because redemption should be within reach for everyone." Edith emerged at the threshold, studying Vernon with a gaze that gave nothing away. "Well," she finally broke the silence, "you're letting the draft in. Get inside and get some food." Vernon ascended the stairs, his knees trembling. He froze in the doorway, acting as if the floorboards might burn him. "I appreciate it," he murmured. I haven't earned this kindness." "Likely true," I replied, "but it's yours regardless." That evening marked the first occasion in 25 years that Vernon Brennan took a seat at the family dinner table. The ensuing weeks proved difficult. Vernon secured lodgings in town, leasing a small space upstairs from the hardware supply. He appeared at the homestead daily to labor, mending perimeter rails, hacking back the undergrowth, and shouldering the physical burdens the rest of us lacked the strength to carry. It was a battle. There were evenings he vanished, and I knew he was wrestling with ancient ghosts, the wagers, the frantic need, the hunger to pursue a win that forever eluded his grasp. Yet he always returned, kept putting in the effort, kept arriving at the gate even when every fiber of his being likely screamed at him to flee. Sawyer's acceptance came at a glacial pace, yet I occasionally caught them laboring together without speaking, and I sensed a change in the air, a mending of sorts. Vernon formally retracted his contest against the inheritance 6 weeks following that meal. He put pen to paper in Denise Caldwell's chambers while Sawyer and I looked on. "I have no desire for the homestead," he stated during the signing. "Truthfully, I never did. I simply wished, I suppose, to signify something, to not be forgotten." "We remember you," I assured him. "You are present. That is the only thing of consequence." The 1-year mark of our coming arrived on a Tuesday in March, a full 12 months since we had stepped into Mrs. Patterson's practice and discovered the existence of a grandfather, the reality of a sanctuary, and the truth that we were not as isolated as we had forever assumed. That single year brought immense evolution. The homestead was unrecognizable, sporting crisp white coats, the veranda reconstructed and solid underfoot. The acreage was productive again, hosting winter wheat, garden crops, and the saplings of a fresh apple grove to succeed the ancient, withered trees. The carpentry shop had evolved into a genuine enterprise. We christened it Brennan Family Woodworks. Sawyer executed the majority of the intricate detailing, his craftsmanship eclipsing even the lessons Hank had imparted. I managed the operations, interfacing with clients, tracking requisitions, balancing the ledgers. Vernon discovered his niche as well. He possessed a knack for engines and gears, as it happened. He excelled at the strenuous tasks that overwhelmed the rest of our group. And he was gradually understanding how to belong to a unit rather than perpetually observing from the periphery. Edith and Hank had transformed into the elders we missed in our youth. She doted on us with the intensity of a matriarch, ensuring our bellies were full, our rest was sufficient, and our hearts understood we were cherished. He imparted his knowledge softly during pauses in the labor, instructing us on matters beyond simply timbercraft, focusing instead on fortitude, tenacity, and the deep gratification of creating structure with one's own palms. When the anniversary arrived, we congregated on the veranda to observe the dusk, a party of 5 spanning 3 generations. Only Sawyer, Vernon, and myself shared a lineage. Yet, we were a clan in every sense. Edith had prepared a celebratory feast, braised beef, tubers, and string beans harvested from our soil. For the sweet course, a tart baked from fruit we had cultivated personally. Once the meal concluded, I retrieved the timepiece Vernon had bestowed upon me, clicking it open to reveal the engraved message within. "Home is where you are loved," I voiced to the group. "This is the creed the Brennans held dear. It was Walter's truth, and it has become mine." I gazed at Sawyer, then Edith and Hank, and finally Vernon. I dedicated my entire existence to searching for a tribe, a hearth, a place to fit. I imagined it was a birthright, a binary possession you either claimed or lacked, a gift bestowed or stolen by fate. I inhaled deeply. However, I was mistaken. Sanctuary isn't a treasure you discover, it is a structure you erect, brick by brick. You build it daily alongside those who appear, those who remain, those who select you, and those you select in return. Sawyer extended his arm and clasped my fingers. "We made a choice for one another," I declared. "Every one of us. That defines our bond. It isn't lineage or statutes or anything other than the resolve we demonstrate each morning to stand here, to remain engaged, and to offer the best affection we can muster." The daylight was fading, washing the pastures in amber, tangerine, and heavy violet hues. These were the very acres Walter had surveyed for 26 years. The identical soil his forebears had tilled prior to his time. The same earth that would now be nurtured by palms he never touched, yet had eternally cherished. Edith dabbed at her damp cheeks. Hank drew her into his side. Vernon gazed across the property wearing a look that was foreign to his features. It resembled serenity. Sawyer tightened his grip on my fingers. "I never imagined I would possess such things," he murmured. "A sanctuary, a clan, a reason to rise." I assumed folks with our history were denied these gifts. Folks like us receive precisely what we are prepared to battle for, I countered. And we scraped and clawed for this reality every single sunrise. My mind drifted to Walter, to the correspondence he penned that never found its way to our hands, to the affection he harbored but could not voice, to the terror that froze him in the role of a distant observer, paralyzed and unable to bridge the divide. I comprehended that dread now. Yet, I had also grasped a truth he was denied the opportunity to uncover. Extending one's hand was worth the effort. The gamble was worth the cost. The love was, and always is, worth the journey. I let go of it all, Walter. I breathed into the fading twilight, and I hope you realize, your grandchildren finally made it back. A soft breeze whispered through the branches. The stream babbled in the background, and a profound weight finally lifted from my chest. It was the feeling I had chased my entire existence without knowing its name. Serenity. Not because the world was flawless or every scar had faded, but because I was standing exactly where I belonged, surrounded by the very souls I was meant to find. You do not stumble upon a home, you forge it. And we had finally raised those walls together. I am deeply grateful you walked this path with me. This narrative reshaped my spirit, teaching me that kinship runs deeper than bloodlines. It is about presence. It is the active choice to embrace one another repeatedly, particularly when the road gets rough. If these words struck a chord in your heart, I would be honored if you joined our subscribers. We tell tales here of resilience, of redemption, and of discovering a tribe in the most unlikely corners. I would love to read your reflections in the comments. What did this teach you about mercy, connection, and the true essence of belonging? Have you ever found your people where you least expected them? Has a second chance ever completely rewritten your future? Please share your testimony, for this gathering place relies on hearts just like yours. Your words might be the exact lifeline another viewer needs right now. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for lending an ear. Thank you for being a vital part of this family we are weaving together. And never forget, regardless of where you stand or how isolated you feel, you are worthy of a place to fit in. You are worthy of affection. You deserve a sanctuary.